You're listening to Two Babies in a Business, a podcast where Peter, my partner, my friend, my healthy conflict haver, and I talk all about the current issues we're facing in our business and in our personal lives, and as it relates to being owners and leaders and parents and a married couple. And we are excitingly continuing a conversation on healthy conflict with one of our favorite people, Steve Osmond, who's a business coach at Rhapsody Strategies and is a part of the CIPR team as our business coach too. We've just been having, I think, an epic conversation on healthy conflict. So, Peter, why don't you
I'll maybe kick it off.
backhand?
I'll kick it off with a couple thoughts here. So first of all, I left the last conversation saying I wanted Steve and Christina to think about, something I've already put on the table at CIPR, which is to actually formally put healthy conflict as a core value of CIPR, which is kind of a bold thing to do, but I think it allows us to have some early conversations with new clients about that and what it means and why it's important. And I think maybe that's a proactive way to kind of not make sure we're not avoiding conflict. But I want to maybe just kind of tell a little story about the best project team I've ever been part of, where it kind of feeds back into the conversation we had before. But I was part of this project team. And it was, for context, I was working at Merit Contractors Association, and we were always fighting with sort of the unions on policies with the government, and there was sort of all this, this background tension, and this project was being kind of led by Shell, who was trying to bring all industry stakeholders together to kind of talk about something for the betterment of the industry. And obviously, Shell was smart enough to know that there was a lot of history between all of these different people they're trying to bring together with different views on things. And they just did an amazing job bringing together sort of a project team, and did sort of started off with a big project charter. And so that's in context of the conversation we had in the last episode, Steve, with respect to what are the ground rules? How do we approach things? And or what I really liked about that process of creating a project charter was, and it actually took like 3 or 4 meetings. Like, it was actually painful to some extent of people just wanting to get to work. But it forced everybody to really have strong conversations, for everybody to get that buy-in, to get weigh in, all the things we talked about in the last show. And then so that we formally created that. And that was really great. And then so everybody signed their name to the project charter at the end, so the buy-in was 100%. And then at the end of every meeting, we would have a little exercise that everybody was forced to go around the table and said, what went well in today's meeting, and it could have been better if. And so all of those things, I think, were deliberately done for addressing conflict, having healthy conflict, not avoiding conflict. Like, it was all very deliberately set up. It was very well done, I thought. And so I just wanted to maybe just kick off with those kind of thoughts, because as you were talking in the last episode, Steve, everything you said gave me the impression of, in order to have healthy conflict, in order to deal with conflict effectively, it really takes a lot of planning and foresight and conversations and transparency and trust. And so, so I just wanted to maybe kick it off with that. And, maybe Steve, what are your thoughts on number one, having healthy conflict as a core value? Seems crazy to me, but I like being crazy. And two, having then a really deliberate approach with respect to kind of a workplace, bringing teams together, and sort of being really deliberate, I guess, about making sure that conflict isn't avoided.
Yeah. First of all, healthy conflict as a core value is an amazing idea. I always like to think of core values from two perspectives. One is and this would be an interesting question considering the business that you're in. Are our core values a marketing tool, or are the core values our guiding rules or guiding principles for the company, how we function? If it's a marketing tool, then healthy conflict might not be a very attractive upfront tool, value. Someone who's uncomfortable with that, or maybe it is. but certainly internally as a value, whether it makes it to the website or not, who knows? But internally, that could become a really strong value. Imagine onboarding someone onto the team and telling them, hey, just so you know, we invite conflict in our organization, and these are the skills that we use, and here's why we do it. Yeah, so I think there's all kinds of opportunity to use and maximize conflict, to bring it out of the shadows where conflict kind of lives in the shadows, bring it out of the shadows, put some light on it, and leverage it.
Yeah.
And then the second question was around sort of being, rephrase it again.
Yeah, so I'd say it's sort of like, obviously having really deliberate, intentional practices, I guess, to either invite conflict or to make sure it's not avoided, or make sure that, people get that way in, or get their opinion out there. Again, I mean, when I did this project with Shell, it was like every single person knew they were going to be forced to say it could have been better if, and so that just forced everybody to have a criticism, right? And I thought it was a really healthy thing.
Yeah. So I love what you're saying. So what you're saying is, let's not avoid it. Let's find some way, whether it's the questions at the end of the meeting, like you said, or if you do conflict training. In our last episode, we talked about setting ground rules. So either way, we become more proactive, getting out in front of conflict and not trying to catch up to it. Oh no, the horse is out of the barn. How are we going to save the days? Like, let's get out in front of it. It's inevitable. So let's put some things in place. So what one of the reasons I'm so proud of you as a company is that you've done this consistently. I think it's probably 3 years that we've been working together around strengthening our teamwork, which always we either directly were speaking about conflict as the topic of the day, or we were circling back to it and touching on it. And one of the ways that you've helped your team be stronger, we introduced a wonderful tool, which is the DISC model, the DISC assessment. I'm not sure if everybody listening or watching is aware of what that is. A quick Google will help you just look that up: DISC personality assessment, or DISC workplace assessment. And then you can do a little more reading on it. But there essentially are 4 quadrants of workplace styles or personality styles, and each of them has a very different approach to conflict. And so I remember the day that we sat in the room together in your house, and we had a map, and everybody on the team could see on the map what their DISC style was. Were they dominant? Were they influencers? Were they steadies? Were they conscientious? And then from the inner circle of where their DISC style was, there was another ring, an outer ring of what is healthy conflict, and different responses. For example, for the more driving dominance one, I'm just looking at my cheat notes over here. For the more dominant driving personality, healthy behavior is to speak up about problems and address issues head on. That's a great way for that style to engage conflict. And then there's another outer ring of that. I think we can put this in the show notes, Peter, if people want to actually see the diagram that I'm describing. So Christina, you're primarily a D style, a dominant style. So for you, speaking up about your problems, addressing issues head on, sticking up for your own rights, those are all really healthy conflict behaviors. There's another outer ring that says, okay, what happens if the tension gets so high, or the emotion gets elevated, and Christina moves into unhealthy, or a typical D, if not Christina? Then the unhealthy behaviors are these: overpowering and getting aggressive, looks to even the score, so revenge, saying things that he or she will or they will regret. And so everybody in the room, when we were in our team training, we all looked at where our dot was on the disc. We all looked at what was healthy. And then we all went, oh, and that was sort of that come to Jesus moment, right? Of like, oh yeah, I do that. I can see how I move out of healthy and move into unhealthy. And of course, we were all comparing notes with each other too, right? So Christina, you're peeking across at Peter's, and Peter's peeking across at another team member, and we're all learning about healthy and unhealthy behaviors according to our workplace style. So again, whether or not our listeners today, whether or not you use DISC, it's a great tool. I recommend it. But whether or not you use DISC or another tool, the point is this, is that we are pausing and reflecting, and we're getting out of our autopilot behaviors, our unhealthy behaviors, and we're learning the tools to bring things back into healthy conflict. So for me, when I look at mine, my style, which is a steady influencer, one of my unhealthy behaviors is doesn't speak up about his needs. So it gets tense in the room. Emotions are elevating and escalating, and Stevie Boy retreats and gets quiet and says nothing. And then after the meeting, Peter, then I pout, or I gossip, or I get passive aggressive. And so I want to stop. I don't want to go there. That's so destructive. And so many companies are filled with that back behind, that politics. I want to stay engaged. So then I look at my map here and I say, okay, what do I need to do? I need to move over more towards what Christina's good at. And I need to speak up. So I take my deep breath. I help my anxiety go down. And then I say, actually, I'd like to say something about that. Is it okay if I share something about that? And then I speak up. Now, the other little nuance here is that Christina knows I'm an S on the disc style. So she can observe me getting quieter and withdrawing. So she's a fantastic leader. I think everybody knows Christina's a great leader. Christina can say, hey, Steve, what are your thoughts on this? So then I'm not totally dependent on my own courage. Now I'm borrowing Christina's courage, who said, hey, Steve, what I know you're thinking about this, Steve, what would you like to say? And so that way, as a team, we are aware of each other's healthy and unhealthy tendencies. And then we join arms in a sense to help each other succeed when it comes to having a powerful conversation together.
Yeah.
I love it. Even for me, it's like that excites me, right? Like when I know that the S or the C doesn't necessarily want to say or chat, and then they go, excuse me, can I? And to me is the D who welcomes that, who wants it, who I'm like, absolutely, like I don't know everything. That's, I think, a transformation of a probably that dominant type too, because I think there's probably times when you're unhealthy, you don't welcome those opinions. But where I'm at now in terms of leadership, it's like that excites me when someone else can come to the table. I think about even a leadership meeting that we had this morning where, I laid some things out and, my answer wasn't the right answer. And that was a great thing because we managed to uncover a really cool answer and solve one of the issues on our VTO. And so, again, even when you were like just role playing there, I was like, oh, yes, you can speak up.
Absolutely. And so that way we have a team approach to solving the conflict issues. So many times in organizations, we put the responsibility on the individual. And we say, everybody else on the team is doing great, but that person over there, they don't know how to handle conflict. They're the bad. Let's separate them. Let's send them to, work with Steve on their conflict skills. And maybe that's part of it, but really we step back and we say, what's our system? What's broken in our conflict system? Do we have robust tools? Are we having open and honest conversations about conflict? Are we preparing in advance? And the stronger the system is, and how CIPR or whatever the organization is, how we approach it systemically is a great way for the organization to together have a big win when it comes to how we have powerful conversations.
Yeah, no, I love that too. I wanted to maybe just switch gears a little bit, slightly, and just kind of talk about the role of emotional intelligence or EQ when it comes to sort of healthy conflict, because it's another area that I think, so I'll just frame this like to make it personal. We just spent the last 2 weeks at my dad's house in Kelowna, and had many conversations with my dad about all kinds of different topics, including, his mortality and what happens after he passes and things like that, very uncomfortable kind of situations. And, obviously there's some assets and some responsibilities and some things that are going to fall on the kids, and you know what I mean? And I wanted to understand what his, so, and so the reason I'm raising that in context of EQ and conflict is because, I think that there's sort of, sometimes there's a need to have some emotional intelligence around a couple different things. One, maybe I've pushed you to a place today where maybe we should stop. And that happened a couple times with my dad. Or it's, geez, you're being really quiet and I'm observing your behavior, and I think there's something that you're uncomfortable with. How can I suss this out? So I just wanted to maybe just spend a couple minutes talking about, I think there's a really important role of having high EQ in terms of having really good conflict, and just want to get your thoughts on that as well, Steve.
Yeah, I love that, how you frame that. So emotional intelligence, the EQ, so IQ, it would be, our thinking. So if are you intelligent? Can you read the book? Can you read the book? EQ, emotional intelligence, is, can you read the room? So I can read the book. So I'm smart, I'm intelligent, maybe genius level. But then when I move into a social context or a relational context, I can't read the situation. Mm-hmm. So I push too hard when I should be more gentle, or I'm too gentle when the best behavior at that time would be to be more forceful. So again, kudos to you and your organization. You actually took time to take your team through what's called Agile DISC. So we just talked about the DISC assessment, but the Agile DISC specifically uses the language of emotional intelligence. And the key word there is agile. Yeah. So is Steve Osmond agile enough to approach different situations in different ways? Or am I just a hammer? And to a hammer, everything's a nail. I have one approach, just hammer, 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 hammer. And no matter what personality I'm dealing with or what situation I'm dealing with, I'm just a hammer. Well, that illustration would be a little extreme, but it's a great example of somebody who doesn't have emotional intelligence. But it does take agility. It takes a stretching to move from one state, emotional state of engaging a social context or a relational context, and using another one. So it would be somebody who is very forceful as their primary emotional state. Forceful, trust me on this. This is my opinion. I know we can do this. And then realizing, oh, I'm talking in a setting or to a person where empathy would be the best tool to use. Maybe there's some grief or there's some pain, and I'm not emotional agile, so I say, get over it, pull up your socks. Other people have it worse than you. Suck it up, buttercup, or whatever. So that's that hammer, right? So I'm not, at that moment, I'm not emotionally agile. People would say I'm an asshole at that point. They're like, what are you doing? So to be emotionally intelligent would be able to read the room and say, oh, empathy's needed here, listening, encouragement, finding a way to ask more than tell, listen more than talk. So getting that agility in place, and again, that DISC course, the DISC training course on Agile DISC is a great tool. I know that we've gone through it together, but I really encourage organizations to emphasize that, to become emotionally intelligent. I've talked a lot there. I feel like I'm talking too much. What are your thoughts on that, Christina?
Yeah, I mean, I think we often talk about even just well, personally and professionally, I think, Peter, you and I talk about, people who get it and don't get it. And I think fundamentally, to me, it comes down to that emotional intelligence, right? Like there are just individuals who understand the flow of conversation and moving things forward, and whether it's emotional intelligence versus IQ, whether it's book smarts versus street smarts, there's just something right in there that you have it or you don't. I think that you can get better at it, but I think as I reflect on team members or even friends, there are just certain people who come into a situation, and they're often the ones that aren't afraid of conflict and aren't afraid of tough conversations and welcome them. I'm going to talk about Marjana, who's no longer with CIPR, but she knows that I always just was in awe of her emotional intelligence. She could meet people where they were at. I'm confident she still does that in her new organization. And we were always able to have really great constructive conversations about her progress, about my own progress as her leader. And it makes a relationship easy, because in every relationship, whether it's business or personal, there are hard things. I think that, sometimes there's this glamorized notion that, the best relationship is just, everything's easy and all. Like, no, like the best relationships, they have some issues and some things to work through. And I look to her as someone who is a great example of, we had a really solid relationship because we could come to the table and just be ourselves. And, I think that, it just makes growth easier. It doesn't make you stagnant. It doesn't make you, and again, a leader obviously has to be good at it, but like, I also would encourage team members, and I think we do here at CIPR, but it's like, if you bring that to the table, one, you're showing, I think, that leadership potential, but also you're helping grow the business, right? You're now just stepping up and stepping into where you think you're needed. And it's an interesting, emotional intelligence is an interesting one for me, because I think I used to think you either had it or you didn't, which is probably my very narrow, D enneagram 8 person. But obviously you can grow into it and become more self-aware. And
well, the reason I raised it, Christina, is exactly for that purpose, is because I think the theme of these last two podcasts really around healthy conflict has been around the fact that it takes work to have healthy conflict, and it takes planning, and it takes thinking, and it takes understanding yourself and understanding others. And so all of that work, as it really fundamentally also takes some work on your own emotional intelligence and the emotional intelligence of your team, and as a team, and understanding each other's personalities, and that all builds trust, and then that is what allows that healthy conflict to be the best it can be. I think that's just my opinion on it, which is why I kind of raised it in this context, because I think if we don't do that work, as I started this episode, of the work of what is our, how are we dealing with things, what is our constitution as an organization, what are we all about here, if we don't do that work up front, then to your point, Steve, is to the previous conversation, the previous episode, it's like, people don't know, and people don't know what what the rules are, and what's okay and what's not okay. And then somebody comes in like a bullet in a china shop and starts to run over people, and all of a sudden it's like the whole organization's up in arms, right? So I think that if organizations and individuals do the work, then they're just not going to get derailed by unhealthy conflict most of the time, right? I think that's kind of, to me, that would be the summary of both of these conversations, is you got to do the work.
Yeah, I love the word energy. are we willing to exert energy, to spend energy on becoming skilled in conflict, to become emotionally agile? Peter, you hinted at it earlier that some organizations avoid it because it takes so much time. We could be working on emails, we could be working on this. It's so slow to go back and do ground rules. It's so slow to do DISC assessments. And so we skip that step in forming our teams. And then later on, the team blows up and it costs way more turnover and drop balls and lousy ideas, and just all that stuff could have been avoided if we would have, as I like to say, you've probably heard me say this before, we slow down so that we can speed up. We slow down, make sure that we have conflict as a value, so that later we're not driving off the road into the ditch as a team. We're able to keep moving further and farther and faster because now we know how to handle the ride when the road gets bumpy.
Yeah, my one of my other favorite sayings, it's a soccer saying from like FIFA World Cup, like video game, is sometimes you have to go back to go forward, right? It's exactly what you just said. Yeah, totally.
Well, I might wrap us up, guys. I think there'll be the age-old question that maybe we'll tackle again soon of, will healthy conflict be a core value? I think everyone knows where I lead. It kind of sounds scary. But Steve, thank you. Thank you for sharing your insights. I know this will not be the last time we talk about healthy conflict, and I know you'll be coming on the podcast again soon.
Thanks for having me, and love you both, and looking forward to continuing to work with you.
Awesome.
Us as well, Steve. Thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to another episode of Two Babies in a Business. To learn more, visit CIPRcommunications.com or catch us on our socials at CIPR Comms.